Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. You're watching Alaska Weather. Thanks for joining us on this 11th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay aware of your weather situation around Alaska. You can do that several ways. One of them is the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. You can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska for all of your latest watches, warnings, and advisories, current conditions, and certainly some more information about any coastal flooding that could be occurring in your region. One place we're watching tonight is the region around Golovin and west toward Nome. We are expecting to see some high surf and run up around the Nome Council Road area. A high surf advisory is posted until 10 o'clock Thursday morning for the south-facing shoreline there along the Seward Peninsula. High wind warnings west of that are shaded in red for the western end of the Seward Peninsula and especially around St. Lawrence Island. Expecting gusts there up to around 60 miles per hour. Some other places that we are watching, areas around Golovin for sure, could see a little bit more of a surge later on this evening and tonight. But we're also seeing some areas of higher water around Quingilligok, easy for me to say. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that slowly tapering off as we get into the evening and overnight hours there. This seems to be occurring as a front is pushing ashore into south and western Alaska with some strong southerly winds coming in. So expect that to get better before we see a whole lot of increase in the water across areas in the south-facing shoreline of the Seward Peninsula. Along the Alaska Range, also looking for gusts to come up as we head through tonight and into tomorrow. Wind advisories are posted there for gusts up to 60 miles per hour, and that'll probably last through the evening hours of Thursday and start to taper off after we get past about midnight on Thursday. So again, some blustery travel if you're driving up and down on the roads or trying to get through any of the passes there with your aircraft. Fire danger continues to be an issue there, and mainly for areas that we haven't seen a whole lot of rain out of our recent weather pattern change. Most of that's really been focused on the west, so we're still watching for some drier spots around Fort Yukon and the Yukon Flats, down into the Middle Tanana Valley, though that is getting better quickly, and certainly around the Copper River Valley. That seems to be one of our driest spots right now, so fire danger remains high. We are seeing improvements around the Kenai Peninsula, the Anchorage Borough, as well as the Susitna and Matanuska boroughs. So watch for the fire danger to gradually decrease as we go into the next week or so. But for right now, it's always a good idea to be careful with fire when you're out. Now, as we take a look at the satellite picture this afternoon, you'll notice several areas of low pressure. One of those is sitting south and west of the outer coast of southeast. And this is going to slosh up some more rain. This is already producing some rainfall across southern parts of southeast this afternoon. This is expected to add a little more rainfall to areas northward as we go forward into the next day or so, and some probably small craft advisories should develop later tonight and tomorrow as we go. The really big weather pictures out here across the Bering Sea. That low pressure system now west and north of St. Paul and St. George, producing storm force winds just offshore of the YK Delta, and again producing enough southerly wind that we'll be watching for some higher surf around the south-facing shoreline of the Seward Peninsula, again from Golovin out toward Nome and the Council Road, and certainly some higher winds that could create some damage around St. Lawrence Island. So keep watch on that and tuck everything in if you can tonight. Around southwest, we're watching for this system to bring in some heavier rainfall for a time as well. It does have some tropical origins, and so there may be some brief periods of heavier rainfall that should taper off quickly. As we get into this afternoon and tomorrow, don't be surprised to find some heavier pockets of rain around Prince William Sound as well. Some of that was already being reported around Cordova this afternoon. Low pressure across the eastern parts of the Gulf at 992 millibars. The front's moving ashore just south of Haida Gwaii right now. This will move a little bit further north and east as we go. Several waves of low pressure rotating around this, but the main weather picture is really centered up on that 970 millibar low with a deep southerly fetch working into the southwestern Capes and creating areas of turbulence up across the western parts of Alaska. We'll talk about that more in our aviation weather here in a minute. High pressure is fairly weak just north of Haines and east of Tok and Northway. That's gradually giving way and helping to pump in a little more southerly flow across the west coast tonight and into tomorrow. The system's going to move fairly quickly. As it moves ashore by Thursday, the winds will come up fairly quickly across the Alaska Range. You'll notice a lot of cloud cover spreading north into the central and eastern interior, but you probably won't see a lot of rain there. So Fairbanks, you'll get warm, but you won't see a whole lot of the precipitation that's falling out across the west. Areas of light rain and drizzle will spread into parts of Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound. The further south and west you go, the faster the winds are going to blow, and it's going to be pretty choppy and a bumpy ride if you're flying out into Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, or perhaps out towards St. Paul tomorrow for your flying day. As the weather moves eastward quickly, rain will spread into southeast. It'll be fairly unsettled for the rest of the weekend, into the weekend it looks like for many in the Panhandle. For South Central, low pressure settles up across the northern Gulf, keeping our weather a little choppy here around the Anchorage region and the Kenai Peninsula. Don't look for a ton of rain around Cook Inlet. You'll see a little more wind and a lot of cloud cover, but some of the heaviest precipitation is going to focus up across Prince William Sound, parts of south and west. And by Friday afternoon, you'll notice that southerly wind that's been affecting parts of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island should really ease up. There is another weather system coming in behind it. A quick look at temperatures as we get into Thursday morning for southeast. Fairly mild, low and mid 50s to many across the outer coast, 53 in Sitka, 50 for Ketchikan and Annette, and about 51 for the capital city. Prince William Sound looking at temps in the mid to upper 40s, 48 in Cordova where it's raining heavily right now, 48 around Homer. Around the Anchorage region, probably closer to the upper 40s to about 50. The middle Tanana Valley, 42. Note that Healy could dip into the 30s tonight. North Slope temperatures in the 30s and 40s as well. Utqiagvik toward Kaktovik, probably upper 30s to nearly 40 degrees and fairly mild. 50 for Kivalina, 48 around Nome. Southwestern temperatures in the mid to upper 40s. King Salmon and Dillingham just shy of 50 degrees. Sandpoint about 53, and Adak and Atka also close to 50. Quick look at highs tomorrow. That warm weather moving over the middle Tanana Valley could push high temperatures close to 70 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR conditions are expected across the north and western parts of the Alaska Range into the Chugach and Kenai Peninsula region. You'll also notice IFR kind of working its way into southern parts of southeast into the eastern Gulf and around Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula all the way back to just about the Shumagins before you run back into VFR. We'll see a couple spots of VFR south of St. Lawrence Island, north of Makoriak, and then across the southwestern Capes there. A large part, of course, of the Bering Strait, the Bering Sea, I should say, as well as the Pribilovs and the central and western chain will be covered up with marginal conditions in the morning. And watch for widespread IFR across the north coast from just east of Wainwright all the way out toward Kaktovik. As you get into the afternoon, what we see in the North Slope doesn't change a whole lot, but we will be watching areas along the west coast as that large area of low pressure is getting closer to shore. Underneath that and passing over the St. Paul, St. George area will be some areas of convection, so we'll be watching for that. And of course, that certainly does apply some quick changes in wind shear and turbulence as that's moving through. Not looking for a whole lot of icing problems with that, but again, that is always an area of concern in the case of convection. Around areas around Prince William Sound, the western Alaska Range, and certainly hit and miss across the eastern Gulf. We're starting to see more areas of IFR develop, including areas inside of the Inside Passage around Chilkoot and White Pass and all the way out to about Glacier Bay and Gustavus. Friday morning, widespread IFR across the North Slope, also seeing that around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. South of that through most of the Yukon Valley, Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, looking like a widespread VFR. Once again, convection starts to work into parts of southwestern Alaska. We see IFR coming off of St. Lawrence Island. Hit and miss marginal conditions across the chain into Kodiak Island, Cook Inlet. Right now looking to be VFR, but Kenai Fjord side, Seward, parts of Prince William Sound, all looking to be IFR, and a lot more IFR expected across southeast on Friday morning. By the afternoon, we see that really focused on the higher terrain. Hit and miss marginal conditions across the Inside Passage. IFR across some of the higher terrain there for south central and southeast, and certainly across the Alaska Range. The North Slope doesn't seem to catch a break by Friday afternoon. Still looking at IFR, marginal conditions for the coastal plain, and then IFR conditions for some of the higher terrain in the lee of the Brooks Range summits. Now across the west, convection areas across Bristol Bay, marginal weather across a large part of the Bering, and then IFR just south of the western chain is developing for Friday afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we're going to see IFR to start in the morning. I think for Adigan Pass a little bit further east, you're probably going to fare a little bit better off, trending toward VFR in the afternoon. Lake Clark, Merrill Pass also looking at IFR throughout the day. Same goes for Rainy Pass and Windy Pass. Looking like things improve as we get into the afternoon for Windy Pass and for Isabel Pass, so some good news there. Mentasta Pass right now looks to be VFR. We're going to see changing conditions toward the end of the weekend. In the weekend, though, Tanita Pass, VFR conditions moving over toward marginal weather as we go. And then at Portage Pass, expecting to see IFR. Chilkoot and White Pass, as we saw on the charts there just a minute ago, looks like IFR will be developing throughout your day tomorrow. Freezing levels show a bubble of some cooler air developing here around the northern parts of Cook Inlet, southern sections of Susitna, anywhere from 6 to about 4,000 feet, just shy of that maybe around Cook Inlet and Anchorage. South of the chain, we see our 6,000 foot level dropping into the Alaska Peninsula. Cooler weather still well off to the north and west, and levels across eastern Alaska anywhere from 6 to 8,000 feet, and for southeast anywhere from 8 to 10. Icing potential right now still pretty high up there, but you know it's fall. You know that's coming soon and going to start dropping down. But around the Pribilofs and around that center of the low, it seems to be around 9,000 feet and above. 10,000 feet as you get a little bit further into the Alaska Range, and northward that drops back down to about 9,000 feet and above, 8,000 feet and above for areas around the Copper River Valley. Most of that, again, isolated moderate at this point. The jet stream has our huge area of low pressure centered up across the Bering. The main ribbon of fast-moving air is right there across the Aleutians. Wind maxes there around 150 knots. So this is a powerful Pacific jet. And then it breaks off into a secondary low across southeast and sends a strong surge of southerlies into the mainland, especially the west coast at 65 knots. 9,000 feet, you can see a broad southerly flow. Note that lee side troughing that's happening here. So again, some turbulence certainly possible in the west tomorrow. West and northwesterlies coming into the Aleutians anywhere from 40 to 50 knots. Southeasterlies moving over southeast Alaska 15 to 30. On the north slope, wind maxes around 15 to 25 knots coming over places like AKwx. Strong southeasterlies over the west coast and interior west, 45 to 50 knots. Again, watch out for turbulence over the higher terrain. And west and northwesterlies coming across the Bering, St. Paul, St. George as well, 30 to 40 knots over the western chain. Watch out for the potential of considerable moderate and isolated severe in the lee of the Alaska Range as we go through your daytime tomorrow, especially below 8,000 feet.
Some places on the surface you might have these steep cracks and giant fissures that you would have to be careful not to fall into. In other places you might see towers of ice right next to places that were relatively smooth. You might see places that were dark. Ice there, it takes the form of rock. It's frozen solid until you dig down into that ocean. So you may see some things that look similar to Earth, but you may see some things that are very different.
That voice you just heard?
I am Morgan Kramer, NASA scientist.
I love it.
That's Morgan. She's probably one of NASA's best spokespeople for exploring our solar system's icy moons.
Europa's a fascinating place. It has this liquid water ocean that's about 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a lot of water.
To understand what makes Earth so special, sometimes you need to back up and take in the big picture. Remember, the cryosphere is every place on Earth with frozen water. And water is one of the biggest indicators for life.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it.
And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of with life. Although Europa isn't the only icy moon in our solar system, NASA has identified it as one of those places with key astrobiological potential. Morgan is a collaborator on the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa, an instrument selected for NASA's next mission to Jupiter's icy moon Europa. But she's also more than just a scientist working in a laboratory. She's preparing future NASA missions for success on the surface of alien worlds. This year, Morgan and her colleagues were in the field studying how life colonizes in fresh lava.
Earth, it turns out, has a lot of excellent, what we call analog environments, places that are similar enough to some of these other worlds that we can conduct some tests and we can do some analyses here. Now, they're not perfect, of course. They're not going to be exactly like Europa, but we can still learn a lot by testing in these environments. Some of these places include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle, but there are other places too, Alaska, Greenland, even Iceland. Any place where you have a lot of ice, because guess what the surface of Europa is made of? A lot of ice.
Studying the cryosphere doesn't just have big implications for Earth. It also matters for the frozen worlds in our own cosmic backyard.
If we're able to find life or evidence of past life on a place like Europa, that tells us that not only can life happen in other places, but it's common enough that it happened at least twice in the same tiny solar system. That means that the universe is wide open in terms of how much life we might find, the types of life we might find. It would revolutionize how we see ourselves and the possibilities for contact in the universe. It would be amazing. Oh, it's so exciting.
As it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. So it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving. My interest in glaciers comes from the sheer size of these things and how much they're able to change on human timescales. And so the amount of mass and energy being transferred by glaciers around the globe is tremendous. It's an absolutely fascinating thing to study from space.
Mountain glaciers are some of the most charismatic parts of the cryosphere. Some might cling to the edges of cliffs at higher elevations, then lay bare and flat in a broad plain, looking cracked and weathered like elephant skin, before tumbling thousands of feet toward the sea and terminating in a dramatic calving front. They're like motion frozen in time, until they aren't. They tell a story about the distant past and yet are incredibly responsive to the present. You can understand why they'd be captivating to all of us, and especially cryospheric scientists. Meet Alex Gardner, a cryospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who is going to help break down what a classic West Coast North American glacier might look like, where high amounts of snow dump onto the mountains.
And at higher elevations, there's melt in summer, but not enough melt to get rid of all of that snow. And so that snow accumulates, it compacts, it turns into ice, and it starts to flow under its own weight, and it flows down the valleys. And as it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out and down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving.
Alex uses satellite data to study large-scale changes in glacial ice. But 2,000 miles to the north, Chris Larson from the University of Alaska Fairbanks spends a lot of time studying glaciers from the air. He's been flying over Alaskan mountain glaciers for many years, most recently on a NASA-funded mission called Operation Icebridge Alaska. He's absolutely enamored with his local rivers of ice.
And what do you love about mountain glaciers?
Well, they're in mountains, so they're really pretty.
You couldn't ask for a better way to experience Alaska on a large scale than to go flying around for campaign after campaign and look at all of the mountains in Alaska. Truly infinite. You just feel like you'll never see the end of them and don't want to either.
But Chris doesn't spend weeks away from home and family for the views. Chris and his colleagues at NASA want to answer some pretty big questions by learning more about Alaskan glaciers and how they tick.
You know, why does NASA care about these? Well, they actually disproportionately contribute a large amount to sea level rise.
In the long run, as the Earth warms due to climate change, the big ice sheets and mighty outlet glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica stand to contribute the most to sea level rise, simply because the vast majority of the planet's ice is stored there. But currently, it's the world's smaller mountain glaciers in comparatively warmer places like Alaska and Patagonia that are contributing about a third of all inputs to sea level rise, even though they account for only 1% of the world's ice.
Mostly due to them being dynamic. They have water at the bed, which allows them to slide fast, and they react quickly to climate change and have higher velocities than their polar counterparts.
Back at JPL, Alex uses satellite measurements of global ice and computer models to predict ultimately how much sea level rise we might see due to climate change. But in the case of mountain glaciers, we also care about the local impacts of disappearing ice.
When we think of changes in ice sheets, we typically think of just what is the consequence for sea level rise and the future evolution of the ice sheets. But glaciers in other regions, like high mountain Asia, Alaska, the European Alps, these are places where changes in runoff matters to stream flows. In places like high mountain Asia, you have a lot of glaciers that feed the streams that flow down to populated regions. And that runoff becomes significant for water resources, irrigation, and agriculture.
Both Alex and Chris are passionate about understanding how glaciers are changing and what it means for our planet's future. They'll continue to use tools like elevation maps from the ICESat-2 satellite and detailed airborne measurements to monitor changing ice.
By the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your marine weather now. No big change in the ice since we talked yesterday and really the week before. We're still approaching the sea ice minimum for the season, but as it stands, the main ice pack north of AKwx around 350 to 400 nautical miles to the north. AKwx just off the screen is about 250 to even 325 nautical miles to the north. So a lot can still happen. A lot is still melting. The marginal ice you see on the eastern side of your screen here is rotating around the Beaufort Gyre and not new ice at this point. This is the latest from September 11th. As always, you can get the very latest information from the Alaska Sea Ice Program by going to weather.gov/alaska/ice. Thursday's marine forecast, a broad southeast flow coming up through the southeast. Look for southerlies inside of Lynn Canal, 15 knots and 3-foot seas there. Winds coming up a little bit more in Clarence Strait. Small craft advisories possible, some stronger gusts, 4-foot seas expected there. Southeasterlies on the outside as well, generally around 8 to 9 feet with that 20-knot wind. As we get into Friday, notice that southerly winds coming up a little bit more outside of Cross Sound up into Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather. On the inside, not a big change, 4 to 5-foot seas, but you're still talking about small craft advisories in several places there. So watch for choppy conditions to develop. The main point would be by Thursday and Friday, probably Saturday, it's going to be raining, at least showery and kind of unsettled for where you are. A little bit of a change from where you've been. For Prince William Sound, easterly winds 35 knots and 9-foot seas. Look for 9 to 16-foot seas down the west coast of the Gulf. As you get into the Barrens, 40 knots with 16-foot seas, 45 knots around the western Barrens, in fact. North and easterlies coming through Cook Inlet, especially outside of Kamishak Bay. In Kachemak Bay, especially, easterlies will be coming up stronger than they've been in recent days. As we get into Friday, winds reverse course. They go light in many locations, 10 to 15 knots. You're looking at 8 to 9-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. And easterlies, generally lighter easterlies, 15 knots and 3-foot seas for Prince William Sound on Friday. For the west and southwest now, this is where it really gets active. South and westerly winds are coming up, 25 to 35 around Bristol Bay, 9 to 20-foot seas north of Cold Bay, 20-footers. And then around St. Paul and St. George and west, you can see the brighter colors here indicating anywhere from about 25 to 27-foot seas in our scale. And the longer lines mean stronger winds. So put all that together, things are going to get a little rough. Southerlies east of Kodiak Island at 40, 15-foot seas there, as well as south of Sandpoint looking for 15-footers with that westerly wind. Winds come down on Friday. That's the good news. But we're still talking about some pretty choppy conditions west of Perryville, Sandpoint, Cold Bay, all the way into the southern Bering. 20-foot seas there with that westerly flow, 35 knots. Watch out for the gaps as well. Those are going to have some stronger gusts. 15 knots with a southwesterly flow in Chillicothe Strait and a 4-foot sea, 11-foot seas east of Kodiak. High winds and high seas north of Nikolsky and Dutch Harbor in Alaska. Here's St. Paul and St. George for reference. Pretty choppy conditions again. Getting a little snotty there with 27-foot seas at least in that area and strong westerly winds. So we're looking at least gale force winds in some cases north of the chain. For the chain and coastal waters themselves, 35 to 40-foot seas. 22 to 23-foot seas there on the Bering Sea coast, 17 to 18-foot seas on the Pacific waters. As you get into Friday, winds start to pull back around into the next weather system that's coming into the western chain Friday. Westerlies from Nikolsky to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 13 to 14-foot seas on the Pacific side. Still looking at 20-foot seas north of Nikolsky and Unalaska as we go into Friday with those high winds starting to push eastward. For Thursday along the west coast, tonight and tomorrow will be some of the stronger southerly winds you're looking at, and so south-facing coastlines like areas around Quig, you're probably going to see some high water. We know you have high water right now. As that front is working through, conditions should ease after that passes later this evening, and you're starting to see southerly winds work into the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula. So from Golovin all the way out toward Nome, and especially along Nome Council Road, a high surf advisory is posted. Not quite for Golovin yet, but don't be surprised to see some higher water in those areas, at least for a short amount of time. Again, that's all because of that really strong southerly flow coming in. By Thursday, that should let up. South and southwesterlies moving out of St. Paul and St. George with 21-foot seas there. Tomorrow, 6 to 10-foot seas on an easterly flow out of Norton Sound and over St. Lawrence Island. Again, high wind warnings for St. Lawrence Island too. For Friday, winds come north, and with that, the high water should recede, and it will be cooler and showery, but not as blustery and rainy as it has been today. So conditions get better by Thursday and Friday. For the North Slope, north and easterlies for the Beaufort Seacoast, an offshore flow for the Chukchi, 25 to 30. Look for 5 to 8-foot seas there by Friday. A north and easterly wind coming through, 15 to 25. Look for low conditions there across the Arctic coast as that high pressure system pushes wind to shore. 20 to 25, you're looking at 4 to 5-foot seas there on Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, big low in the Bering is working its way to the north and west of St. Paul and St. George, moving a front ashore. Southerly winds coming in ahead of that with some heavy rain at times and some strong southerly winds that'll bring the water up in south-facing coastline communities. So watch for that. That should be generally brief, though, as that front moves in. Conditions should improve. They'll be low, but they won't be as windy or as choppy on the coastal areas. Heavier rain for Prince William Sound at times around Cordova, and rainy periods setting up for southeast as we go into the weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.